In the heart of the Mekong Delta, Lieutenant Daniel "Ghost" Keegan was about to walk into a sniper's crosshairs. A simple reconnaissance mission turned into a deadly game when the infamous Phantom of the Delta chose his next target. Keegan wasn't just another officer on patrol. For 12 years he had honed his skills in the shadows, trained by the best in special operations. His kill count was classified, but his reputation whispered through briefing rooms and enemy camps alike. He was a ghost because no one ever saw him coming. When the Phantom fired from an impossible angle, he believed he had ended another American career. But he had no idea he was facing a mind that had already mapped every possible counter-move. Keegan didn't just dodge death, he turned the hunt back on its hunter, triggering a sniper duel that would shake the jungle itself. What began as an ambush would become a masterclass in tactical genius. The Mekong Delta would never be the same after two ghosts of war collided in the ultimate test of patience, precision, and deception. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The briefing room felt like a tomb. Captain Mercer's words hung in the stale air, each detail another nail in a coffin. Daniel "Ghost" Keegan wasn't sure he wanted to climb into. The map on the wall showed their target zone, deep in the Mekong Delta, where the jungle swallowed men whole and spat out their bones. Intelligence suggests increased VC movement in this sector, Mercer said, his finger tracing a path through the green expanse. Your mission is simple reconnaissance. Get in, gather intel on enemy positions, and get out. His eyes met Keegan's for a fraction too long. There are also reports of an elite sniper operating in the area. The locals call him the Phantom of the Delta. Sergeant Mike "Rook" Rains shifted in his chair beside Keegan. The Brooklyn-born spotter had been Keegan's shadow for 18 months, and he'd developed an uncanny ability to read his partner's thoughts. Right now, those thoughts were screaming that Mercer wasn't telling them everything. Any confirmed kills? Keegan asked, his voice carrying the calm detachment that had earned him his own ghostly call sign. 7 officers in the past month. Mercer's response was too quick, too rehearsed. All clean shots, all impossible angles. Keegan absorbed this, his tactical mind already dissecting the implications. 7 officers, not sergeants, not enlisted, men officers. This wasn't random violence, this was strategic elimination. The Phantom wasn't just hunting, he was dismantling the American command structure one bullet at a time. 6 hours later, deep in the emerald hell of the Delta, Keegan moved like a shadow through the undergrowth. Rook followed 3 paces behind, matching his footsteps perfectly. They'd been walking for 4 hours, seeing nothing but jungle and more jungle. But Keegan's instincts, honed by years of studying military history and combat tactics, were screaming. "Something's off," he whispered, barely moving his lips. The jungle's symphony of birds and insects continued unabated, but that was exactly what bothered him. No breaks in the pattern, no sudden silences that might indicate enemy movement. It was too perfect. Rook's response was equally quiet. "Like we're the only ones out here? Like we're exactly where someone wants us to be." They pressed on, but Keegan's mind was racing through scenarios. The Phantom's 7 kills hadn't been random. Each shot had been calculated, each position chosen with surgical precision. If Keegan had been hunting American officers in this sector, this is exactly where he'd want them to go. High ground to the north, swamp to the south. Natural choke points everywhere. The shot came without warning. No muzzle flash, no sound until after the bullet had already passed between them, close enough for Keegan to feel the displacement of air. Rook dropped instantly, years of training taking over. Keegan was already calculating, his mind reconstructing, the bullet's trajectory even as he rolled into cover behind a massive tree trunk. 700 meters, he breathed. Northeast ridgeline. He's using the morning sun to mask his position. Rook's eyes widened. No one took shots at that distance, not in this terrain. The humidity, the wind, the thick canopy, it should have been impossible. But the hole in the tree trunk behind them, perfectly placed where Keegan's head had been, said otherwise. "Ghost," Rook whispered. "We're not hunting him, are we?" Keegan checked his rifle, mind already formulating counter-sniper tactics. "No," he admitted. "We're not." His fingers traced the wooden stock of his weapon, feeling every groove, every imperfection. "We never were." Another shot cracked through the jungle, this one striking a branch above them. Keegan's eyes narrowed. The Phantom wasn't missing. He was sending a message. This wasn't just about killing them. This was about something else. "Rook," Keegan said, his voice carrying that eerily calm tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. "I think it's time we change the game." He studied the ridgeline through his scope, seeing nothing but knowing they were being watched. "If the Phantom wants to play chess, let's show him why they call me Ghost." The jungle fell, silent again, but now the silence had weight. Somewhere up there, hidden in the emerald shadows, one of Vietnam's deadliest snipers was watching, waiting, calculating, just like Keegan. Two hunters, two ghosts, locked in a deadly game where one mistake meant death. And in his gut, Keegan knew this was exactly where Captain Mercer had meant them to be all along. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Moving through the jungle was like swimming through green molasses. Keegan led them on a circuitous route toward the ridgeline where the shots had originated, every step calculated, every movement precise. His mind kept returning to Captain Mercer's briefing, not what was said, but what wasn't. 700 meters, Rook whispered, still processing their near-death experience. In this humidity? Through this canopy? Ghost, that's not just skill. That's art, Keegan finished, his eyes scanning the tree line. He'd studied enough military history to recognize genius when he saw it. The Phantom wasn't just another VC sniper. He was a master of his craft. They reached the ridgeline, 40 minutes later, moving in a pattern designed to counter any traditional sniper tactics. But when they found the firing position, Keegan's respect for their opponent deepened. A single brass casing, positioned exactly where it would catch the morning light. No other trace. No broken twigs, no disturbed earth, no sign that a human being had ever occupied the space. "He's playing with us," Rook muttered, sweat dripping from his brow despite the relative shade. Keegan picked up the casing, feeling its weight. "No," he said, his voice carrying that detached, analytical tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. "He's studying us, learning how we move, how we think." He pocketed the casing. "Just like I'm studying him." A crack split the air. Rook's canteen exploded, water spraying across his chest. They dropped instantly, but Keegan's mind was already calculating. Different angle, different distance. The Phantom had relocated while they'd been examining his old position, and he'd had time to set up the perfect shot. "He's hurting us," Keegan realized, the pieces falling into place. Every shot, every move, he's directing our path like a shepherd with his flock. Toward what? Rook's voice carried an edge of fear now, the Brooklyn accent thickening with stress. Another shot answered them, this one clipping a branch precisely between their positions. Message received, move or die. Higher ground, Keegan decided, already plotting their route. He wants us on the ridge overlooking the river bend. His lips curved into the ghost of a smile. "It's where I'd want us." They moved, but not the way the Phantom, not the way Quien expected. Keegan had spent years studying the art of war, from Sun Tzu to modern tactical doctrine. "When your enemy expects you to advance, retreat," he whispered, more to himself than to Rook. "When he expects you to retreat." They climbed, but Keegan chose their path carefully, using the terrain to mask their true direction. Every few minutes, another shot would crack through the jungle, each one a precise calculation designed to push them toward their destination. But Keegan was done being herded. "You see it, don't you?" he asked Rook as they paused in the shadow of a massive banyan tree. His patience, his precision, every shot calculated, every moment waited for. He checked his rifle, mind racing through possibilities. He's not trying to kill us, not yet. He's trying to understand us. Rook wiped sweat from his eyes, his usual swagger replaced by a tense alertness. Why? What's the point of all this? Because that's how you destroy an enemy, Keegan answered, his voice carrying a note of grudging admiration. You learn how they think, how they move, how they react under pressure. Then, when the moment is perfect. The shot that interrupted him was so close they could hear the bullet spin. It struck Rook's radio, destroying their last link to command. But Keegan was already moving, his rifle coming up as his mind calculated the new firing position. For a fraction of a second, he saw him, a shadow within shadows, moving with the same liquid grace that had earned Keegan his own ghostly nickname. Their eyes met across the distance, two hunters recognizing each other as equals. Then Quyen was gone, melting into the jungle like morning mist. He's good, Rook breathed, checking his destroyed radio with shaking hands. Better than good, Keegan corrected, his mind already formulating a new strategy. But now I know what he wants. He checked his ammunition, each movement precise and measured. He wants a worthy opponent, someone who understands the art of the hunt. A smile touched his lips, the cold, calculating smile of a predator. So, let's give him one. It's time we showed the phantom why they call me Ghost. In the distance, a bird took flight, startled by something unseen. Keegan watched its path, knowing Quyen was watching too. The game had changed. They were no longer predator and prey. They were two masters of their craft, locked in a deadly dance of patience and precision. And somewhere in the jungle, Quyen waited, knowing exactly what Keegan was thinking, because it was what he would think too. The helmet balanced perfectly on the makeshift stand, angled just enough to catch the afternoon light filtering through the canopy. Keegan had positioned it exactly where an exhausted soldier might rest, seeking shelter from the oppressive heat. The trap was artistic in its simplicity, almost too perfect. He won't fall for it, Rook whispered from their hide position 30 meters away, his voice barely audible above the jungle's constant drone. No, Keegan agreed, eye pressed to his scope. He won't. A slight smile touched his lips. But he'll appreciate the gesture. They'd spent the last hour setting up the kill zone with the same meticulous attention to detail that had marked Queen's own work. Every sight line calculated, every angle considered. Keegan had even disturbed the ground around the helmet in a pattern that suggested two men moving quickly, sloppily, the kind of mistakes that exhaustion breeds. The jungle held its breath. Somewhere out there, Queen was watching, analyzing, appreciating the craftsmanship of Keegan's deception. This wasn't just about killing anymore. This was about something deeper, a conversation between two masters of their craft, spoken in the language of tactics and patience. Movement, Rook breathed. 2 o'clock, upper canopy. Keegan's scope found the disturbance, a slight shifting of shadows that shouldn't have moved, but something felt wrong. The movement was too obvious, too deliberate. Quyen wouldn't make such a basic mistake. Wait, Keegan whispered, his tactical mind racing. Something's... The shot came from behind them, not from Quyen's position, not from anywhere they'd been watching. The bullet struck a tree between their hide position and the helmet, sending splinters flying. The report echoed through the jungle, different from Queen's rifle. Heavier. American. Down, Keegan hissed, pulling Rook deeper into cover. His mind was already reconstructing the shot's trajectory, but the implications chilled him. This wasn't Viet Cong. This wasn't even regular army. A burst of static from Rook's backup radio, the one they weren't supposed to have, cut through the tension. A voice, distorted but clear enough. Charlie 6, target zone is hot. Both players are engaged. Awaiting further instructions. Keegan's blood ran cold. Both players. The phrasing was deliberate, professional. Military intelligence, maybe CIA. Someone was watching them, had been watching them all along. Another shot cracked through the jungle, this one from Quian's position. But he wasn't firing at them. He was firing at the new threat. The bullet struck something metal, probably a canteen or rifle barrel, and the jungle erupted with cursing in English. "Ghost?" Rook whispered, his face pale beneath the camouflage paint. "What the hell is going on?" Keegan's mind raced through scenarios, each one darker than the last. The vague briefing, Mercer's too perfect intelligence, the way they'd been steered into this exact sector. We're being played, he realized, all of us, even Quian. The radio crackled again, this time catching fragments of a different transmission. "Confirmed contact. Proceed with Phase 2. No witnesses." "Phase 2? Rook's voice cracked. "Ghost, this isn't recon. This isn't even combat. This is a test," Keegan finished, his voice carrying that eerily calm tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. Or an experiment. They wanted to see what would happen when they put two elite snipers in the same hunting ground. He checked his ammunition, each movement precise despite the growing chaos. But they didn't count on us figuring it out. Third shot split the air, different angle, different weapon. 3 snipers now, locked in a deadly triangle. But Keegan's mind was already adapting, recalculating. He'd studied enough military history to recognize patterns, to see the bigger picture emerging from the chaos. "Rook," he whispered, "we're changing missions." He pointed to the ridge where they'd first spotted Quian. "Someone up there is pulling strings, playing games with our lives. I want to know who and why." A branch snapped nearby, too close. Keegan spun, rifle ready, only to catch a glimpse of a shadow moving with familiar grace. Quian, he could have taken the shot. Could have ended their duel right there. Instead, he melted back into the jungle, leaving behind a single brass casing. Message received. The game had changed. "So what's the play?" Rook asked, his trust in Keegan's tactical genius unwavering despite the growing uncertainty. Keegan's eyes narrowed as he studied the ridge where their new enemy waited. "We stop being pawns," he said softly, "and start being players." He shouldered his rifle, mind already formulating a new strategy. It's time to hunt the hunters. The jungle resumed its eternal drone, masking the sound of 3 predators moving through its depths. But now the rules had changed. Now it wasn't just about survival or victory. It was about uncovering the truth behind the game, before the game destroyed them all. The radio's static crackled with fragments of coded transmissions. Keegan's mind, trained to recognize patterns, began piecing together the puzzle. Charlie 6 Alpha, confirmed visual. Maintain containment. The language was pure military intelligence, clinical, precise, detached from the deadly game they were orchestrating. "Ghost," Rook whispered, his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted the radio's frequency. "These codes, they're new, not standard Army." "Because they're not Army," Keegan replied, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. "Listen to the cadence, the precision. This is something else, something darker." A twig snapped somewhere to their left, too obvious, too deliberate. Keegan's rifle was up before his conscious mind registered the movement, but he held his fire. These weren't Quian's tactics. The Phantom was an artist, not a rookie making basic mistakes. The shot that followed confirmed his suspicions. It came from a completely different angle, striking the tree beside them with surgical precision. Quian wasn't trying to kill them. He was warning them. The real threat lay elsewhere. "Move!" Keegan hissed, pushing Rook toward deeper cover. They'd barely made it 3 steps when another shot cracked through the jungle, this one from the mysterious 3rd sniper. The bullet passed between them close enough for Keegan to feel its passage. "They're hurting us again," Rook gasped, his Brooklyn accent thickening with stress. "Playing us like goddamn puppets." Keegan's mind raced, through scenarios, calculating angles and possibilities. The 3rd sniper, This whisper, as Rook had started calling them, was professional. Too professional. They moved like someone trained in advanced military tactics. But their shots weren't meant to kill. They were meant to manipulate, to control. The radio crackled again. Subject A showing expected tactical response. Subject B maintaining discipline. Proceed with escalation protocols. Subjects A and B, Keegan muttered, the pieces falling into place. We're not soldiers to them. We're test subjects, lab rats in their jungle maze. A flash of movement caught his eye. Quyen, sliding through the shadows like a ghost. Their eyes met for a brief moment across the clearing. In that instant, Keegan saw something in the Viet Cong sniper's gaze. Recognition, understanding. They were both being played. Another shot from the whisper forced them apart. Keegan rolled behind a massive root system, his mind already formulating a new strategy. Rook, he whispered, check your ammunition. Count every round. Why? Rook asked, but his hands were already moving to comply. Because our friend up there isn't just watching. They're learning, studying. Every shot we take, every move we make, it's all data to them. Keegan's eyes narrowed as he studied the ridgeline where the whisper waited. But they're not the only ones who can gather intelligence. The radio hissed again, this time catching a different voice. Time check. Phase 3 begins at 1500 hours. All observers maintain positions. Rook's face went pale. Phase 3? Ghost, what the hell are we in the middle of? Something bigger than a sniper duel. Keegan answered, his tactical mind already plotting their next move. This isn't about killing us, it's about studying us. Learning how we think, how we adapt. His lips curved into a cold smile. But they made one crucial mistake. What's that? They forgot the first rule of hunting. Sometimes the prey learns faster than the predator. A burst of gunfire erupted from the north. Regular army patrol. Too far to be a threat, but close enough to add another layer of chaos to the game. Keegan watched as both Quyen and the whisper adjusted their positions in response. Their movements told him everything he needed to know. The whisper isn't working alone, he concluded. This is an operation. Multiple observers, multiple angles. They're gathering data on how elite snipers operate under extreme conditions. His voice hardened. And they don't care who dies to get their results. Rook's hands tightened on his rifle. So what's the play, Ghost? We can't outshoot them both. We don't have to. Keegan checked his scope, mind already 5 moves ahead. We just have to change the parameters of their experiment. He pointed to a dense section of jungle, canopy. They want to study how we hunt? Fine. Let's show them how a ghost really operates. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as Keegan formulated his plan. Somewhere out there, Quyen was watching, waiting, probably thinking the same thoughts. And above them all, the whisper observed, unaware that their subjects were about to turn the tables. Time to stop being the hunted, Keegan whispered more to himself than to Rook, and start being the hunter. The game was changing. The maze was becoming a trap, and the observers were about to learn why some experiments are better left in the lab. The abandoned sniper's nest told its own story. Keegan studied the position with a professional's eye, noting the precise measurements, the carefully maintained sight lines, the methodical preparation. This wasn't a hastily chosen spot. This was a workspace crafted by someone who understood the art of death. Look at the shell casings, he murmured to Rook, who was scanning the tree line with increasingly nervous movements. All cleaned up, except this one. He held up a single brass casing positioned exactly where the morning light would catch it. They're not being sloppy. They're leaving breadcrumbs. Ghost. Rook's voice carried an edge of desperation. We need to call for extraction. This isn't recon anymore, this is something else. Something wrong. But Keegan's mind was already racing ahead, seeing patterns within patterns. The whisper's position had been perfect, too perfect. Every angle calculated, every escape route planned. This wasn't just military training. This was something else entirely. They won't send extraction. he said quietly, still examining the shell casing. Because officially, we're not here. This whole operation, he gestured to the jungle around them. This is off the books, way off. A shot cracked through the canopy, Keegan firing from a new position. The bullet struck a tree well wide of their location, but Keegan understood the message. The Phantom was acknowledging the changing game, showing he too recognized the greater threat. We're being hunted for sport, Rook whispered, his face pale beneath the camouflage paint, like some sick game. No, Keegan corrected, his tactical mind assembling the pieces. Not sport. This is a study, an experiment. He began setting up his own kill zone, placing subtle triggers and markers that would force any approaching threat into predictable paths. And we're not the only test subjects. The jungle held its breath as Keegan worked, his movements precise and calculated. He'd studied enough military history to recognize the patterns, the way great hunters thought, the way they moved, but something about the Whisper's methodology felt wrong, clinical, detached. The message, when they found it, confirmed his worst suspicions. The bullet stood upright in the tree trunk, defying gravity, held in place by precise geometric calculations. Beside it, pristine and untouched by the jungle's endless moisture, sat a playing card, the King of Spades, the Death card. Jesus, Rook breathed, taking an involuntary step backward. They're playing with us. No, Keegan said, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. They're evaluating us, testing our responses, our adaptability. He studied the bullet's position, noting the exact angle of entry. This isn't just about killing, this is about understanding how we think. Another shot rang out. Keegan again, this time closer. The bullet passed harmlessly overhead, but its message was clear. Move. Now. Ghost, Rook pleaded. We need to get out of here, call it in, get emergency extraction, something. But Keegan was already moving, his mind racing through scenarios. The Whisper wasn't just hunting them, they were conducting a field test, studying how elite snipers operated, under extreme conditions. And somewhere up there, watching through their scope, they were taking notes. You want to understand how we think? Keegan muttered, setting the final pieces of his counter trap. Fine. Let's give you something to study. The jungle seemed to shift around them, shadows within shadows. Somewhere to the north, Keegan moved like a ghost through the canopy, no longer hunting them but watching, waiting, understanding. And above them all, the Whisper observed, their clinical detachment, masking something darker. What's the play? Rook asked, his trust in Keegan's tactical genius warring with his growing fear. Keegan's eyes narrowed as he studied the ridgeline where the Whisper waited. They want to test our limits? See how we operate under pressure? A cold smile touched his lips. Then let's show them what happens when you push a ghost too far. The King of Spades card fluttered in a slight breeze, its face seeming to mock them. But Keegan wasn't playing cards anymore. He was playing chess, and it was time to change the game. Remember what I taught you about counter-sniper operations? He asked Rook, his voice barely a whisper. Yeah, the best defense is a better offense. Exactly. Keegan shouldered his rifle, mind already plotting 3 moves ahead. They want to study predator versus prey? Fine. Let's show them what happens when the prey decides to hunt the hunter. The jungle resumed its eternal drone, masking the sound of 3 deadly forces converging. But now the rules had changed. Now it wasn't about survival or victory. It was about turning the tables on those who thought they controlled the game. And somewhere up there, watching through their scope, the Whisper was about to learn why some experiments are better left in the lab. They found Keegan's nest at sunset. The position was perfect, a natural depression in the hillside, overlooking 3 major approaches, with dense foliage providing optimal concealment. It was exactly where Keegan would have set up himself. Ghost, Rook whispered, examining the space with growing unease. Someone's been here recently. The ground's still warm. Keegan's tactical mind was already processing the details. The careful arrangement of branches for maximum coverage. The precise angles carved into the dirt for quick target acquisition. The small pile of brass casings, arranged not randomly, but in a deliberate pattern. "It's a message," he murmured, studying the formation. "He's telling us that you think like I do," a voice said from behind them. They spun, weapons ready, but Keegan's finger never tightened on the trigger. Quyen stood there, his own rifle, held at a carefully neutral angle. His face was lean, weathered by war, but his eyes carried an intelligence that matched Keegan's own calculating gaze. "You are not my enemy tonight," Quyen continued in near-perfect English, his accent subtle, but cultured. "We have both been made into pieces on someone else's board." Rook's rifle remained trained on the Viet Cong sniper. "Ghost, this is crazy. He's VC. We don't make deals with—" "How long have they been watching you?" Keegan interrupted, his mind already racing ahead. "The ones above us. The ones pulling the strings." A ghost of a smile touched Quyen's lips. 3 weeks. They began by studying my patterns, my techniques. He gestured to the brass casings. "Like you, I noticed their presence, their clinical interest." "Jesus Christ," Rook muttered. "Ghost, we can't—" The shot that interrupted him came from above, the whisper reminding them all who really controlled the game. The bullet struck the ground between Keegan and Quyen, sending both men diving for cover. "They do not approve of our cooperation," Quyen observed dryly, now sheltered behind the same fallen tree as Keegan. "They prefer us as adversaries, not allies." Keegan's mind raced through implications. This isn't just about studying snipers, is it? They're testing something else, something bigger. Indeed. Quyen's eyes carried a weight beyond mere tactical calculation. They watch how we adapt, how we think, how we— He paused, searching for the right word. "How we evolve under pressure." Another shot forced them deeper into cover. Rook cursed, his Brooklyn accent thick with stress. "This is insane. We're talking strategy with a guy who was trying to kill us an hour ago." "No," Keegan corrected, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone. "He was never trying to kill us." "Were you?" Quyen's smile was razor thin. "If I had wanted you dead, Lieutenant Keegan, you would be dead. Just as I would be dead if you had truly wished it." He checked his ammunition with precise movements. "We are both artists in our craft." The whisper. His expression darkened. "They are something else, something colder." The radio crackled, a burst of static that carried fragments of coded transmission. Keegan's trained ear caught pieces. Subjects exhibiting unexpected cooperation, implement contingency protocols. They're going to change the game, Keegan realized. Force us back into conflict. Yes. Quyen's movements were fluid as he prepared to move. But they have made a mistake. They believe they understand us because they have studied us, but they do not understand the art of war, Keegan finished. Their eyes met, two masters recognizing each other's craft. A third shot rang out, closer this time. The whisper was moving, adapting their own strategy to counter this unexpected alliance. "We must separate," Quyen said, already sliding back into the shadows. "They will expect it. But remember, Ghost, the best deception is the one your enemy believes they have anticipated." "This is crazy," Rook hissed as Quyen melted away into the jungle. "Ghost, we can't trust him. He's exactly like me," Keegan interrupted, his tactical mind already formulating new strategies. "And that's what they're afraid of. They can predict us individually, but together—" A cold smile touched his lips. "Together we become something their algorithms can't calculate." The jungle seemed to shift around them, shadows within shadows moving with deadly purpose. Somewhere out there, Quyen was already implementing his part of their unspoken plan. And above them all, the whisper watched, their clinical detachment masking growing concern. The game had changed. The pieces had rebelled. and the players were about to learn why some weapons can't be controlled. They can only be unleashed. The morning mist clung to the jungle floor like a burial shroud. Keegan moved with deliberate carelessness, making himself just visible enough to be tempting. His boots left clear prints in the mud, an amateur's mistake that any skilled hunter would notice. The bait was set. Now he just had to wait for the whisper to take it. "This is suicide," Rook muttered from his concealed position 30 meters back. "They're too smart for this, Ghost. They'll see right through it." "That's what I'm counting on," Keegan replied, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. But something felt wrong. The jungle was too quiet, the silence too complete. The smell hit him first. Metallic, organic, wrong. He found the body in a shallow depression, partially covered by fallen leaves. The dead man wore American gear, but no unit insignia, a sniper's ghillie suit custom modified for jungle warfare, professional, expensive, off the books. "Ghost," Rook's voice cracked as he examined the corpse. "He's one of ours, special operations, maybe CIA." Keegan's mind raced through implications as he studied the kill shot. Clean, precise, straight through the heart. "No," he corrected quietly. "He was one of them, their own operator." He pointed to subtle details in the man's equipment. "Look at the rifle modifications, the custom scope mount. This is their technology, their training. Why would they kill their own man? Because dead men don't talk." Keegan examined the body closer. And this one knew too much. The radio on the corpse crackled to life, making them both jump. A voice emerged from the static, barely more than a whisper. "You're playing my game, Ghost." Keegan's blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming through their frequency. This was a direct channel, meaning the whisper had planned this moment, prepared this exact scenario. "The game's over," Keegan replied, knowing they were being watched. "Your experiment failed." A soft laugh came through the radio. "Failed? Oh no, Lieutenant Keegan. You're performing exactly as expected. You and your friend Quyen, both of you, perfect subjects. Perfect examples of tactical evolution under extreme stress." The click was almost imperceptible, a sound so subtle that only years of combat training made Keegan recognize it. "Down!" he screamed, throwing himself sideways as the landmine detonated. The blast caught them at the edge of its kill zone, showering them with dirt and shrapnel. Rook emerged coughing, his face streaked with blood from small cuts. "Ghost, you okay?" But Keegan's mind was already processing the implications. The mine's placement, the timing, the precise calculation of their likely escape route. "They're not just watching us," he realized. "They're recording everything, every decision, every adaptation." His voice hardened. "We're not players. We're data points." The radio crackled again. "Very good, Lieutenant. Your tactical analysis continues to impress. But tell me, what happens when the test subject becomes aware of the parameters? When the rat realizes it's in a maze?" "Ghost," Rook whispered, his hands shaking as he checked his weapons. "We need to get out of here. Call in an emergency extraction. Something." But Keegan's expression had changed, his tactical mind shifting into a higher gear. "No," he said softly. "We're not running." He studied the jungle around them, seeing it with new eyes. "They want to observe how we adapt? Fine. Let's show them what happens when the experiment fights back." "You don't understand." The whisper's voice carried an edge of amusement. "This isn't about survival anymore. This is about progression, evolution. You and Quyen, you're both perfect examples of tactical adaptation, but now..." A pause. "Now we need to see how you handle true desperation." Another click, this time from multiple directions. More mines armed and waiting. The jungle had become a deadly maze, every path potentially lethal. "Your move, Ghost," the whisper taunted. "Show us how you evolve." Rook's face was pale beneath the dirt and blood. "Ghost, what do we do?" Keegan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed their position. The corpse, the mines, the radio. All of it deliberately placed, carefully calculated. But there was something else. Something in the whisper's voice. "We stopped playing their game," he said finally, his voice hardening with resolve. "And we start playing mine." The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Somewhere out there, Keegan was watching, understanding, and above them all the whisper observed, unaware that their perfect experiment was about to become their perfect nightmare. The leather-bound notebook was military issue, but the contents were anything but standard. Keegan found it half buried near the dead sniper's position, its pages filled with meticulous observations written in a precise hand. Not field notes, these were research entries. "If you know your enemies and know yourself, you will not be imperiled in 100 battles," Keegan murmured, recalling Sun Tzu's words as he studied the entries. "But if you do not know your enemies nor yourself, you will be imperiled in every single battle." "Ghost," Rook's voice carried an edge of concern. "You're starting to scare me. Finding that body, these mind games, any normal person would be losing it, but you're getting calmer." Keegan's eyes never left the notebook as he replied, "Because I'm starting to understand." He turned another page, his tactical mind processing the information. "Look at these entries, detailed psychological profiles, combat response patterns, decision trees under stress." The radio crackled to life, cutting through the jungle's ambient noise. But this time, instead of the whisper's voice, they heard something else. Recorded. Conversations, final words of dying soldiers, screams cut short by gunfire. "Jesus," Rook whispered, his face pale. "Those are from previous operations. Previous subjects." "Exactly." Keegan's voice remained steady as he continued reading. "They're not just studying how we fight. They're studying how we think. How we adapt." His finger traced a diagram in the notebook. "Look at these behavior matrices. They're treating this like a science experiment." A subtle movement caught his eye, a flash of color where there should be none. Tied to a branch nearby, a piece of red cloth fluttered in the breeze. "Keegan's signal. He's trying to tell us something," Keegan muttered, moving carefully toward the marker. Beneath it, tucked into a hollow, he found another notebook. This one filled with Vietnamese characters, but the diagrams were the same. They've been running these tests for months, he realized, pieces falling into place. Different snipers, different scenarios, building a database of tactical responses under extreme conditions. His eyes narrowed. But they made one critical mistake. The radio crackled again, this time with the familiar whisper. "Analyzing the data, Lieutenant Keegan. Good. A proper scientific mind. But remember, in this experiment, you're not the observer. You're the subject." Rook's hands tightened on his rifle. "Ghost, this is beyond messed up. We need to—" "Listen," Keegan interrupted, his tactical mind fully engaged. "What do you hear?" "The radio, the jungle. What exactly?" "The radio broadcasts are coming from multiple directions now. They're using speakers hidden in the trees." A cold smile touched his lips. "They're creating a psychological warfare environment, trying to break us down. But in doing so, they're revealing their positions," Rook finished, understanding, dawning. The voices of the dead continued to echo through the jungle, a haunting chorus designed to shatter their resolve. But Keegan's mind was already plotting, calculating, seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. "Sun Tzu also said this," he murmured, closing both notebooks and tucking them into his gear. "Supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." Another signal from Keegan. This one a precise arrangement of broken branches pointing toward high ground. The message was clear. He'd seen something. "Ghost," Rook said quietly. "I know that look." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time we turned their psychological warfare against them." Keegan checked his ammunition, each movement precise and calculated. "They want to study tactical adaptation? Fine. Let's show them something they've never seen before." The radio voices grew louder, more distorted. a carefully orchestrated crescendo of horror designed to break their spirits. But Keegan's expression remained calm, almost serene. "You're not just calm," Rook realized, studying his partner's face. "You're enjoying this, the challenge of it. Because now I understand the game." Keegan's eyes scanned the canopy, picking out the subtle signs of electronic equipment hidden among the leaves. "They think they're studying us, cataloging our responses, building their perfect tactical database." His voice hardened. "But they forgot the most important lesson of warfare." "Which is? The best weapon isn't the one you use." Keegan shouldered his rifle, mind already 3 moves ahead. "It's the one your enemy doesn't know you have." The jungle seemed to pulse with the recorded screams of the dead, but Keegan moved with renewed purpose. Somewhere up there, the Whisper watched, still believing they controlled the experiment. Still believing they understood their test subjects. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The jungle became Keegan's canvas, and death was his medium. Each tripwire, each angled branch, each disturbed patch of earth, all of it precisely calculated, meticulously arranged. He wasn't just setting traps, he was creating art. "This is suicide," Rook whispered, watching as Keegan rigged another explosive from their dwindling supply. "You're literally leaving them a trail of breadcrumbs, showing them exactly where we are." "No," Keegan corrected, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone that now held a darker edge. "I'm showing them exactly where I want them to be." His hands moved with surgical precision as he set the final wire. "They think they understand tactical thinking? Let's give them something new to study." The plan was elegant in its audacity. Every trap, every trigger, every killing zone was positioned to look like desperation, like the last-ditch efforts of a hunted man. But beneath that obvious layer lay something deeper, something darker. "You've changed," Rook observed, studying his partner's face. "This isn't just about survival anymore, is it?" Keegan's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They wanted to study the evolution of tactical thinking under extreme stress. He checked the sightlines one final time. "So let's show them what that really means." The radio crackled, the Whisper's response to Keegan's invitation, but instead of words they heard music. Beethoven's 7th Symphony, the 2nd movement, the song of fate, of inevitability. "Classical music?" Rook's voice cracked. "Now they're just showing off." "No," Keegan murmured, his tactical mind processing the choice. "They're telling us they see the beauty in what we're doing, the artistry." He adjusted a final tripwire, the movement precise as a surgeon's cut. "They appreciate the game." A flash of movement in the canopy caught his eye. Quyen, watching from his own carefully chosen position. The Vietnamese sniper had become a ghost in his own right, appearing and disappearing at will. But Keegan knew he understood, knew he saw the true purpose behind the elaborate setup. "Ghost," Rook said quietly. "If this works, if we actually manage to trap them, then we'll have proven their hypothesis." Keegan's voice was distant, his mind already gaming out the final moves. Tactical evolution under extreme conditions, the creation of perfect predators. The symphony continued to echo through the jungle, its mournful notes a counterpoint to the deadly geometry Keegan had crafted. Each trap connected to the others, creating a lethal maze where every escape route led to another killing zone. "You're not just trying to kill them," Rook realized, watching as Keegan made one final adjustment to the central trigger. "You're trying to prove something." They wanted to study the psychology of warfare. Keegan's eyes held a cold fire now. "Fine. Let's show them what happens when you push a man past his limits, when you strip away everything but the pure science of killing." A new sound cut through the music. Slow, deliberate applause. The Whisper's response to Keegan's challenge. "Brilliant, Lieutenant," the voice purred through the radio. "Simply brilliant, the elegant simplicity of it, the perfect balance of obvious and subtle." A pause. "But tell me, do you really think we didn't anticipate this level of adaptation?" Keegan's smile grew colder. Actually, he said softly, I'm counting on it. The jungle held its breath, waiting for the next move. Somewhere above them, Keegan watched, understanding the true game being played. And in the shadows, the whisper observed, still believing they controlled the experiment. Final positions, Keegan ordered, his voice barely a whisper. Remember, no matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, stick to the plan. Rook checked his weapon one last time, his hands steady despite his fear. It's been an honor, Ghost. But Keegan's mind was already elsewhere, calculating angles, reviewing contingencies, seeing the deadly ballet about to unfold. The symphony reached its crescendo, filling the jungle with its fateful notes. The game was ending. The final pieces were in place, and in the growing darkness, a ghost prepared to show his hunters why some experiments should never leave the lab. Night fell like a shroud over Keegan's killing ground. Every trap was set, every angle covered, every escape route transformed into a deadly funnel. In the growing darkness, he waited, his mind as still as the jungle around him. Then the voices began. Please, tell my mother I tried to be brave. The words crackled through hidden speakers, the voice young, terrified, dying. Another voice overlapped it. Medic, dear God, somebody help. Cut off by gunfire, then screaming. Rook's breathing quickened beside him. Ghost. Those are real. Those are actual radio transmissions from Focus, Keegan commanded. But his own mind was struggling to maintain its clinical detachment. The voices were perfectly chosen, perfectly timed. Soldiers dying alone in the darkness, their last moments preserved and weaponized. You understand the art of physical warfare, Lieutenant? The whisper's voice purred through their own radio. But let's explore the psychological dimension, shall we? The cacophony of death grew louder, surrounding them. Young voices, old voices, voices begging for mercy, voices cursing their killers. A symphony of human suffering conducted by an unseen hand. They're trying to break our concentration, Keegan muttered, more to himself than to Rook. Make us doubt our senses, question our... A flare burst above the canopy, bathing the jungle in harsh white light. For a moment, every shadow became a threat, every branch a potential enemy. Keegan's eyes caught movement, figures darting between trees. But when he focused, there was nothing there. Ghost. Rook's voice cracked. On our 3 o'clock. I thought I saw. They're projecting images. Keegan realized, his tactical mind racing to adapt. Using the mist as a screen, making us see. The shot came from their left. Precise, controlled, missing Keegan's head by inches. Keegan's signature. But this wasn't an attack, this was a warning. Keegan breathed, understanding flooding his mind. He sees something we don't. The flare died, plunging them back into darkness, but now the voices were changing, becoming more specific. Lieutenant Keegan, a dying soldier called out. Why didn't you save us? Why did you leave us behind? They've been planning this for months, Keegan muttered, his composure cracking slightly. Gathering recordings, studying psychological pressure points. Another flare, this one closer. In its harsh glare, Keegan caught a glimpse of figures moving through his kill zone. But they weren't triggering the traps. They knew exactly where every wire was, every explosive, every trigger. Your physical traps are impressive, the whisper commented, their voice carrying an edge of amusement. But predictable. We've been studying your tactical patterns, remember? We know how you think, how you plan, how you... The voice trailed off as a new sound filled the jungle. Laughter. Not recorded, not projected. Real laughter coming from multiple directions. Human voices, but distorted. Wrong. Ghost. Rookie whispered, his hands shaking on his rifle. Are they even real? Are we fighting actual people? Or... Another shot from Keegan, this one striking a tree directly between them and one of the laughing voices. Message received. Some of the threats were real, some weren't. But which? The symphony of death reached a crescendo. Voices begging, crying, dying. Shadows moving with impossible speed between the trees. Laughter echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Your trap was elegant," the whisper continued, their voice somehow cutting through the chaos. "But limited. Physical. We're not just studying tactical evolution, Lieutenant. We're studying the complete dissolution of human consciousness under extreme psychological stress." Keegan's mind raced through options, each one crumbling as another layer of reality was stripped away. His carefully planned kill zone had become meaningless. The whisper had turned the entire jungle into a psychological weapon. A third flare illuminated a figure standing in the open, a perfect target. But when Keegan's scope found it, he saw himself. A perfect replica down to the way he held his rifle. "Ghost?" Rook's voice was barely a whisper now. "What do we do? How do we fight something that's inside our heads?" Keegan's finger tightened on his trigger, then relaxed. His tactical mind, pushed to its limit, began to shift into new patterns, new possibilities. "We don't," he said softly, a new understanding dawning. "We stop trying to outthink them, stop trying to maintain control." A cold smile touched his lips. "Sometimes, the only way to win is to embrace the madness." Quian's voice came from nearby, finishing Keegan's thought. The jungle descended deeper into chaos, but Keegan's mind had found a new kind of clarity. The whisper wanted to study tactical evolution? Fine, let's show them what happens when a soldier stops fighting the insanity and learns to use it as a weapon. The sound of madness had become a physical thing, pressing against Keegan's skull as he led them away from his compromised position. Every step was calculated, every movement precise, but for the first time since the hunt began, his legendary control was slipping. "Ghost," Rook whispered, following so close he could feel his partner's breath. "The radio signals, they're getting stronger in this direction." "I know." Keegan's voice was tight, his tactical mind racing through possibilities. "They want us moving west, which means we're walking right into their trap." "Exactly." But Keegan kept moving, his boots finding solid ground with uncanny precision despite the darkness. Sometimes the only way past a trap is through it. The jungle seemed to twist around them, branches reaching like skeletal fingers in the darkness. The whisper's psychological warfare had transformed the landscape into something alien, hostile. Even the air felt wrong, thick with unseen threats. The radio crackled, different frequencies, different voices, all overlapping. "Charlie Company, hold position. Negative contact, Sector 4. Immediate evac required at..." "They're using real tactical frequencies," Keegan muttered, his mind struggling to separate truth from deception. "Mixing them with their recorded broadcasts, making us question every..." The shot was almost silent, just a whisper in the darkness. For a fraction of a second, Keegan thought it had missed. Then Rook gasped, stumbling forward as blood bloomed across his left shoulder. "Down!" Keegan's command was unnecessary. They were both already moving, finding cover behind a massive tree trunk. His hands moved automatically, checking Rook's wound even as his mind calculated the shot's trajectory. "Through and through," he reported clinically. "Missed the major arteries, but..." "Ghost." Rook's voice was tight with pain. "That wasn't Quian. That was subsonic ammunition, custom suppressor." Keegan's eyes narrowed as he scanned the darkness. The whisper is done playing games. They're closing in for the kill. The radio came alive again, but this time the voice was painfully familiar. "Sorry about your friend, Lieutenant," the whisper purred. "But we needed to see how you'd react to a genuine crisis. Your psychological profile suggested strong protective instincts toward your partner. We wanted to test that hypothesis." Rage flared in Keegan's chest, hot, sharp, dangerous. For a moment, his tactical mind wavered, emotion threatening to override training. Then he felt it, the subtle shift in air pressure that meant someone was moving nearby. Time slowed. His rifle came up as his mind made the calculations. Distance, wind speed, target movement, all of it processed in a fraction of a second. The whisper had revealed themselves, probably intentionally, giving him one chance at a shot. But something held his finger off the trigger. Some deeper instinct, some tactical insight that cut through the chaos and emotion. "Ghost!" Rook gasped. "Take the shot!" "No," Keegan breathed, his mind suddenly clear. "That's exactly what they want. They're studying our decision-making under extreme stress. If I take that shot..." A soft laugh echoed through the darkness. "Very good, Lieutenant. Very good indeed. Your tactical awareness remains sharp, even as your world crumbles around. Hugh." Rook's breathing was becoming labored, the blood loss taking its toll. Keegan's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. They needed to move, to find better cover, to treat the wound properly. But movement meant exposure, and exposure meant a branch snapped nearby, too close, too deliberate. Keegan's rifle swung toward the sound, but his finger stayed off the trigger. Real or fake? Threat or deception? The jungle had become a maze of uncertainty, every shadow a potential enemy, every sound a possible trap. "Your partner is bleeding out," the whisper observed clinically. "Fascinating, isn't it? The way stress affects tactical decision-making. The way emotion conflicts with training." Another movement, this time from above. Keegan caught a glimpse of something, someone, moving through the canopy. Qian, the whisper, or another carefully crafted illusion? "Ghost," Rook whispered, his voice weaker now. "You need to leave me. Find a better position. End this." But Keegan's mind was already shifting, adapting, evolving. The whisper wanted to study tactical responses. Fine. Let's show them something new. "Hold on," he told Rook, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone again. "We're about to change the parameters of their experiment." The darkness pressed closer, filled with threats both real and imagined. But for the first time since the hunt began, Keegan felt something like clarity. Sometimes the best way to win wasn't to play the game better. It was to break the game entirely. And he was about to show the whisper exactly what that meant. The tunnel entrance was barely visible, a shadow within shadows at the base of a massive banyan tree. Keegan hesitated for a fraction of a second, his tactical mind weighing the risks. Underground meant confined spaces, limited escape routes, potential traps. But Rook's breathing was becoming more labored, and the blood seeping through. His makeshift bandage was turning the jungle floor black. "Ghost," Rook whispered, his voice weak. "You know what Charlie does to these tunnels, booby traps, punji sticks. We don't have a choice." Keegan's voice was tight as he helped his partner toward the entrance. "The whisper has eyes on every high point, and you've lost too much blood to keep moving." The descent into darkness was like entering another world. The jungle's cacophony of psychological warfare faded, replaced by the soft drip of water and their own carefully controlled breathing. Keegan moved them forward by touch, one hand on the rough-hewn wall, the other supporting Rook. "They're old," he murmured, his tactical mind processing details even in the darkness. "Pre-war construction. Local villagers probably used them for storage before." He trailed off, feeling something change in the tunnel's texture. Rook's breathing hitched. Before Charlie turned them into killing grounds, Keegan's fingers found marks in the wall, precise geometrical patterns carved into the packed earth. Not random damage, not military markings. These were measurements, angles, calculations. "Quine," he breathed, recognizing the work of another tactical mind. "He's been using these tunnels as a parallel hunting ground." They moved deeper, Keegan's world narrowing to what he could touch and hear. The darkness was absolute, but his other senses compensated, building a mental map of their underground sanctuary. Then his fingers found something else. Letters carved fresh into the wall. "There's writing," he whispered, tracing the message. "English. One word." Rook shifted weakly beside him. "What's it say?" "Run." The word hung in the darkness like a physical thing. Above them, muffled by earth and roots, they heard movement. The whisper was tracking them, following their descent into the underworld. Ghost. Rook's voice was barely audible now. I'm not going to... Stay with me, Keegan commanded, but his voice carried an edge of desperation he'd never shown before. We just need to... A sound stopped him. Soft, deliberate, footsteps ahead in the darkness. Someone else was down here with them. His rifle came up automatically, but in this blackness, in these confined spaces, it was almost useless. Lieutenant Keegan. The whisper's voice came through their radio, distorted by the earth above them. The tunnel system, of course, an elegant solution to our surveillance, but tell me, did you really think we hadn't mapped every inch of this underground maze? More footsteps, closer now. Keegan's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. They were trapped, blind, with a wounded man who could barely walk. Then his fingers found more carving in the wall. Not words this time, but diagrams. Precise maps of the tunnel system, marked with symbols he recognized from Quien's previous messages. He's been preparing, Keegan realized, his tactical mind shifting into a higher gear. All this time, while we fought above, he was creating an escape route below. Ghost, Rook gasped. I hear something's coming. The footsteps were almost upon them now. Keegan's world had shrunk to touch and sound, every nerve ending alert for the slightest change in the air. His finger found the trigger of his rifle, knowing that in these tight quarters, in this absolute darkness, any shot would be as dangerous to them as to their attackers. Your partner is fading, the whisper observed clinically through the radio. Fascinating how the human mind operates under such extreme conditions. The combination of physical and psychological stress, the primal fear of darkness and confined spaces. But Keegan wasn't listening anymore. His fingers had found something else in Quien's markings. A pattern, a message hidden within the tactical diagrams. Not just an escape route, but a plan. Hold on, he whispered to Rook, his voice carrying that unnaturally calm tone again. Our friend the Phantom left us more than just a warning. He left us a way to turn this trap into a weapon. The footsteps stopped, just around the next bend. In the absolute darkness, Keegan smiled, a cold, dangerous expression hidden by the blackness. The whisper wanted to study tactical adaptation under extreme conditions. Fine. Let's show them what happens when you corner a ghost in his own grave. The pre-dawn air hit Keegan's lungs like ice water as he emerged from the tunnel entrance, Rook's arm draped across his shoulders. The jungle was silent. Not the artificial quiet of earlier, but something deeper, more primal. The silence of a predator about to strike. Stay with me, he whispered to Rook, feeling his partner's body growing heavier with each step. The blood loss had taken its toll. Rook's skin was pale and clammy in the false dawn light. Ghost? Rook's voice was barely audible. You're 9 o'clock behind the... Keegan saw it too, a shadow moving with impossible precision through the undergrowth. Not the clumsy movement of regular soldiers, not even the fluid grace of Quien's ghost-like passing. This was something else entirely, something mechanical in its perfection. The whisper. Fascinating. The familiar voice purred through their radio. Even now, wounded and exhausted, your tactical awareness remains acute. Your partner's too, despite the blood loss. Keegan kept moving, each step calculated to present the smallest possible target. His mind was racing through possibilities, but for once his legendary tactical genius felt inadequate. The figure moving parallel to them wasn't just skilled, they were something else entirely. Then he saw them, just for a moment, as the growing light filtered through the canopy. A figure in unmarked combat gear, moving like a machine through the jungle. Everything about them was wrong. Too precise, too controlled, too perfect. They wore a mask that covered their entire face, but it wasn't standard military issue. It was something more advanced, more alien. What are you? Keegan breathed, the question escaping before he could stop it. The laugh that came through the Radio was distorted, inhuman. "I am the future, Lieutenant. The next stage in tactical evolution. What you and Qian represent, the pinnacle of human combat ability, I have already surpassed." A shot cracked through the jungle, striking the ground exactly 1 inch from Keegan's boot. Not a miss. A message. "You see?" The whisper continued. "Perfect precision. No human variation, no emotional interference. Pure tactical efficiency." Rook's weight suddenly increased as his legs gave out. Keegan managed to lower him behind a fallen tree, his mind still processing what he'd seen. The way the whisper moved, the impossible precision of their shots, the clinical detachment in their voice. They're not just studying us, he realized, the pieces falling into place. They're using us to calibrate something, some kind of enhancement program. The whisper finished for him. Biological, mechanical, psychological. The perfect fusion of human tactical genius and technological precision. Another laugh, this one even less human than before. "Why do you think we chose you and Qian? The two most accomplished snipers in this conflict. Perfect test subjects for our combat analysis algorithms." Movement in the canopy caught Keegan's eye. Qian, watching from above. The Vietnamese sniper had heard everything, understood everything. His next shot would tell Keegan all he needed to know about where they stood. "Ghost," Rook whispered, his voice growing weaker. "You need to leave me. Find a position. Take the shot." But Keegan's mind was already shifting into new patterns, adapting to this revelation. The whisper wasn't human, not entirely, which meant their perfect precision, their technological advantages, might also be their greatest weakness. "Sometimes," he muttered, remembering an old lesson from his tactical studies, "the most sophisticated weapon can be defeated by the simplest strategy." Another shot from the whisper, this one parting his hair, another demonstration of their inhuman accuracy. But Keegan wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time since this hunt began, he felt his tactical mind fully engage, seeing past the psychological warfare to the truth beneath. The whisper might be the future of warfare, but they were fighting in the present. In the mud, the blood, the chaos of real combat, where human unpredictability still trumped mechanical precision. "Run all the algorithms you want," he whispered, shifting Rook into a more defensible position. "Calculate every variable, predict every move. But there's one thing your enhanced systems will never understand." "And what's that, Lieutenant?" Keegan's smile was cold as he checked his ammunition. The difference between fighting perfect and fighting human. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Somewhere above, Qian watched, understanding. And in the growing light, a ghost prepared to show a machine why some weapons can't be programmed. They can only be unleashed. 3 rounds left. Keegan felt their weight in his magazine like a countdown to extinction. In the growing light, he'd positioned himself where no sniper would ever choose, exposed, vulnerable, almost asking to be shot. Beside him, Rook's breathing had become shallow, his skin waxy in the dawn light. "Stay with me," Keegan whispered, though he wasn't sure his partner could hear anymore. "Just a little longer." His last remaining traps were set with a desperation he'd never shown before, crude, obvious, almost amateur in their placement. Wire strung too high, branches disturbed too clearly, signposts pointing to his position like arrows on a map. "Interesting choice of position, Lieutenant." The whisper's voice carried that inhuman edge of amusement. "Your tactical algorithms must be severely compromised by stress and exhaustion. These mistakes are beneath you." Keegan's hands moved over his rifle with practiced precision, checking, adjusting, preparing. Each motion calculated, each breath measured. His tactical mind was clear now, focused to a razor's edge by the knowledge that everything, his life, Rook's life, the entire game, came down to this moment. "You know what fascinates me most about human combat instinct?" the whisper continued, their voice carrying through the pre-dawn mist. "The way it deteriorates under pressure, the way perfect tactical awareness degrades into animal desperation. Movement in the canopy. Quyen, watching from above. The Vietnamese sniper had positioned himself perfectly to witness the final act of this deadly play. His presence was both validation and warning. Whatever happened next would change everything. "Ghost," Rook managed, his voice barely a whisper. "They're coming. I can hear." "I know." Keegan's finger rested beside his trigger. Not on it. Not yet. That's the point. The whisper was moving now, their enhanced systems undoubtedly calculating every variable, every possibility. The obvious traps, the exposed position, the amateur mistakes, all of it feeding into their combat algorithms. "Your heart rate is elevated," they observed clinically. "Respiratory patterns suggest extreme stress. Tactical position indicates severe impairment of judgment. This is where human weakness becomes most apparent." Keegan remained still, every muscle relaxed, every breath controlled. His scope was aimed slightly left of where he actually intended to shoot. Another obvious mistake for the Whisper's systems to analyze. "You're probably right," he said softly, knowing they could hear him. "Human beings are full of weaknesses, imperfections, flaws in the tactical programming." More movement, closer now. The Whisper was coming, their enhanced capabilities telling them this was the perfect moment to end the experiment. Their systems would be calculating shot trajectories, wind patterns, every possible variable, everything except one. "But you know what else humans have?" Keegan's voice carried that unnaturally calm tone that meant his tactical mind was fully engaged. "Something your algorithms will never understand?" The Whisper appeared exactly where Keegan knew they would, where all his obvious mistakes suggested was the perfect firing position. Their masked face turned toward him, weapon raised with mechanical precision. "And what's that, Lieutenant?" Keegan smiled, a cold, deadly expression. "The ability to lie." His scope was already shifting, his body moving in a way no algorithm could predict because it denied every principle of tactical combat. The shot he took was impossible, firing from an unbalanced position, against his own momentum, defying every rule of marksmanship. The kind of shot no machine would ever calculate because no rational combat system would attempt it. The kind of shot only a ghost would try. The jungle held its breath. Above them, Quyen watched, understanding. And in that fraction of a second, between heartbeats, between life and death, between human instinct and mechanical precision, a single bullet wrote the final chapter of their deadly game. The impossible shot had found its mark. The Whisper lay half-propped against a tree, their perfect posture finally broken, their mechanical precision shattered by all too human pain. Dark fluid leaked from their mask, blood mixed with something else, something chemical. "Fascinating," they gasped, their voice distorting between human and machine. "The probability, the algorithms never predicted. You shouldn't have been able." Keegan approached carefully, rifle ready, each step measured. His tactical mind was still running scenarios, still calculating threats, but something else was emerging beneath the cold mathematics of combat. Something more human. "Your shot dispersal patterns," the Whisper continued, almost admiringly. "Complete violation of tactical doctrine. No enhanced system would ever—" "How did you—" "Because I'm not a system," Keegan replied quietly. "I'm not an algorithm. I'm just a soldier who's seen too much death to believe in perfect solutions." Movement in the canopy, Quyen, emerging like a spirit from the morning mist. The Vietnamese sniper's rifle was lowered, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. He had stayed to witness this moment, this final choice. "You know what happens next," the Whisper said, their voice stabilizing into something almost human. "Standard, tactical protocol, eliminate the threat, complete the mission, it's what you were trained for." Keegan's finger rested near his trigger, not on it. Behind him, Rook's labored breathing reminded him of the cost of hesitation, of mercy shown to the wrong enemy. His tactical mind presented the logical choice. End it. Clean, final, safe. But war, he had learned, wasn't always about logic. "Tell me something," he said instead, studying the complex machinery visible through the whisper's damaged mask. "All those recordings, all those dying soldiers. Did your algorithms calculate their worth? Did your systems measure the weight of their sacrifice?" "Data points," the whisper replied. "Variables in a larger equation. The evolution of combat requires—" "No." Keegan's voice was sharp now. Those were men, sons, brothers, warriors. Each one of them fought and died believing in something bigger than themselves. He gestured to Keegan. "Even those we call enemy understand this. It's what separates soldiers from machines." The whisper's mask tilted, studying him with inhuman focus. "And yet you're both killers. You and the Phantom. Perfect predators. That's why we chose you for the study. Your efficiency, your tactical brilliance." "We're not predators," Keegan corrected quietly. "We're protectors. Every shot we take, every life we end, carries a weight your algorithms can't calculate." He glanced at Keegan, seeing the same understanding in the Vietnamese sniper's eyes. "That's what you never understood about warriors. We don't kill because we want to. We kill because sometimes it's the only way to save what matters." "Then save what matters now," the whisper challenged. "Complete your mission. Eliminate the threat." Keegan's tactical mind presented the scenarios. The whisper could be lying, playing for time. Their enhanced systems might be repairing themselves. Every second he hesitated put himself and Rook at risk. But there was something else now, something his years of studying war had taught him. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in defeating your enemy, but in choosing not to. "No," he said finally, lowering his rifle. "You wanted to study the evolution of combat? Fine. Here's your data point. Sometimes the strongest warrior is the one who knows when not to kill." The whisper's mask revealed nothing, but their voice carried genuine surprise. "You're letting me live? Against all tactical logic? Against your training?" "I'm choosing to be human," Keegan replied. "Something your algorithms can never understand." Keegan moved then, silent as a ghost coming to stand beside Keegan. Two warriors, enemies by circumstance but brothers in understanding, facing the future of warfare with the wisdom of the past. "The experiment is over," Keegan continued. "Your data is flawed because you tried to quantify something that can't be measured. The heart of a warrior isn't in their efficiency or their precision." He glanced at Rook, at the price paid for this lesson. "It's in their capacity to choose mercy over vengeance, life over death." The jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The whisper remained silent, their enhanced systems perhaps trying to process this unexpected outcome. And in that moment, as dawn finally broke over the battlefield, Keegan understood what his years of tactical study had been leading to. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in how you fight, but in how you choose to end the fighting. Blood trickled down the whisper's chest, spreading across their tactical vest in a dark stain. Lieutenant Daniel "Ghost" Keegan kept his M40 trained on the figure sprawled before him, fingers steady on the trigger. The humid air hung thick between them, carrying the acrid smell of cordite and jungle rot. Through the settling gun smoke, a shadow materialized. Fan Keegan emerged from the tree line like a specter, his own rifle pointed downward. Their eyes met across the small clearing. Two apex predators recognizing each other at last, neither made a move to fire. The whisper's laugh came out as a wet cough. "Look at you both," they said, voice carrying an accent Keegan couldn't quite place. "The great Ghost and the Phantom of the Delta. You've performed beautifully." "Shut up," Keegan growled, but something in the whisper's tone made his skin crawl. Behind him he could hear Rook's labored breathing, his spotter, his friend, bleeding out from a gut shot that had come from neither Keegan nor Queen's position. "You were never supposed to make it this far," the whisper continued, smirking, despite the blood staining their teeth. "But then that's what made you such a perfect candidate, isn't it, Lieutenant? You're unpredictability. Quyen took a step forward, his weathered face revealing nothing. But Keegan saw the slight tremor in the Vietnamese sniper's hand, the same tremor he felt in his own bones. They'd been dancing around each other for days, playing a lethal game of cat and mouse. Now, standing face to face, Keegan saw in Quyen's eyes the same dawning realization he felt himself. They'd been played. "Tell me why," Keegan demanded, pressing his rifle harder against the Whisper's chest. "Who are you working for?" The Whisper's smile widened. "Think, Ghost. Why would your command send their best sniper into this sector? Why would the NVA deploy their most skilled marksman to hunt one American officer? This was never about the war. This was about finding the right specimen. We were never meant to leave this jungle." Rook muttered from behind them, his voice barely a whisper. "Were we, sir?" A distant explosion rocked the canopy, sending birds scattering into the pre-dawn sky. Keegan's radio crackled to life, carrying Captain Mercer's voice through bursts of static. "Cleanup team inbound. Secure the package. No witnesses." The Whisper's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Ah, right on schedule. Your Captain Mercer is quite efficient, isn't he? Though I suppose that's why we recruited him in the first place." Keegan's mind raced through every mission brief, every supposedly random encounter that had led him here. The intel that always seemed too precise. The supply drops that put him right in Quyen's path. The radio frequencies that mysteriously failed at crucial moments. "You're not just a sniper," Keegan said, the pieces falling into place. "You're a handler. This whole thing, it was a test." "Oh, it was more than a test, Lieutenant. It was an audition." The Whisper coughed again, more blood staining their lips. "And you both passed with flying colors, though I doubt either of you will live long enough to appreciate that honor." Another explosion, closer this time. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder, cutting through the jungle's ambient noise. Keegan glanced at Quyen, seeing his own decision reflected in the other sniper's eyes. Whatever game they'd been caught in, whatever force had manipulated them into this deadly dance, they had minutes at most before Mercer's men arrived to clean up the evidence. "Your war," Quyen spoke for the first time, his voice calm and measured, "is not our war." The Whisper laughed again, the sound gurgling in their throat. "All wars are the same war, my friend. There are the players, and there are the pieces. You, too. You were supposed to be pieces. My mistake was making you into players." Keegan heard the distinctive sound of M60 machine guns being test-fired. Mercer's men were less than a click out. In the growing light, he could see Quyen's hands tighten on his rifle, years of combat instinct warring with the knowledge that they'd both been betrayed by their own sides. "We need to move," Keegan said, not taking his eyes off the Whisper. "Now!" "Run if you want, Ghost," the Whisper called after them as Keegan backed away. "But remember, you can't escape what you've become. We'll find you again. We always do." The jungle seemed to pulse around them, alive with approaching danger. Keegan met Quyen's gaze one final time, an unspoken agreement passing between them. They were enemies no longer, merely survivors in a game much larger and darker than the war that had brought them here. As Keegan moved to help Rook to his feet, he heard the Whisper's final words floating through the morning mist. "The game isn't over, Lieutenant. It's only beginning." Rook's blood left a dark trail in the underbrush as Keegan half-carried, half-dragged him through the jungle. Every step sent fire through Keegan's overtaxed muscles, but he couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. Behind them, the Whisper's laughter echoed through the trees, broken by wet coughing. "You don't get it, do you, Ghost? There is no winning, only surviving." Through the canopy, Keegan caught glimpses of helicopter silhouettes against the brightening sky. Hueys, at least 3 of them. Mercer was coming in force, but not to rescue them. Never to rescue them. Quyen had already melted away into the shadows, leaving no trace. Smart. The Vietnamese sniper understood what Keegan was just beginning to grasp. They were all expendable. Pawns in a game played by men who would never set foot in this godforsaken jungle. "Sir?" Rook wheezed, his face ghost white. "Leave me, I'll slow you down." "Shut up, Rook." Keegan propped his spotter against a tree, quickly checking the gut wound. The bleeding had slowed, but Rook's breathing was becoming shallow. Without medical attention soon. The radio at Keegan's hip crackled. He'd taken it from a dead NVA soldier, knowing it would be monitoring American frequencies. Now Mercer's voice cut through the static. "Ghost is priority target. If he's still alive, finish it. Permanently." Keegan's laugh was hollow. All those missions, all that trust, and Mercer had been playing him from the start. Well, the captain was about to learn why they called him Ghost. Working quickly, Keegan set up a perimeter of claymores. Not enough to take out Mercer's whole team, but enough to create chaos. He'd learned from watching Quyen, studying how the NVA fighter used the jungle itself as a weapon. Now those lessons would save their lives. "What's the play, sir?" Rook asked, his voice barely a whisper. Keegan checked his remaining ammunition. 2 magazines for the M40, 3 for his sidearm. Not much, but it would have to do. "Remember what I always say about being trapped?" A weak smile crossed Rook's pale face. It's just another word for being exactly where you need to be." "That's right." Keegan finished rigging the last explosive, then carefully erased their trail leading away from the area. "And right now we're exactly where we need to be to teach Captain Mercer a lesson about underestimating his enemies." The helicopters were closer now, their rotor wash bending the treetops. Keegan could picture Mercer in the lead bird, confident in his superior numbers and firepower. The captain was a career officer who'd never learned the most important lesson of jungle warfare. Sometimes the deadliest predator was the one you thought you'd already killed. "Sir," Rook said, his eyes growing unfocused. "If we don't make it." "We're making it." Keegan cut him off, checking the detonator one final time. "Both of us. This isn't about winning anymore, it's about surviving. And that's something I'm very, very good at." The first helicopter began its descent into the small clearing where they'd left the Whisper. Keegan could see armed men preparing to fast rope down, their weapons at the ready. They were good soldiers, professionals, but they were looking for a wounded sniper trying to escape. They weren't ready for a ghost coming back to haunt them. 30 seconds, Keegan whispered, helping Rook to his feet. "Then we show them why you never corner something that's already dead." Above them, the jungle canopy swayed in the helicopter wash, and Keegan allowed himself a grim smile. He wasn't a soldier anymore. Soldiers followed orders, maintained discipline, died for the cause. He was something else now, a survivor, a shadow, a ghost in the machine that had tried to use him up and throw him away. And ghosts, as Mercer was about to learn, had a way of turning the hunter into the hunted. The first Huey touched down in a swirl of dust and debris, its rotor wash flattening the tall grass. From his position in the canopy, Keegan watched through, his scope as Mercer stepped out, M16 held ready. The captain's face was set in hard lines, his eyes scanning the tree line. 6 more men rappelled down from the other helicopters, forming a perimeter with practiced efficiency. They were good, but they were hunting a ghost. "Target spotted," Keegan whispered to Rook, who lay hidden in a shallow depression 20 meters back, covered by foliage. "Mercer's leading from the front. Stupid. Always was an arrogant bastard," Rook managed through clenched teeth. Mercer raised his fist, signaling his men forward. They advanced in a standard search pattern, checking the body of the Whisper, which lay where they'd left it. Keegan's finger rested lightly on the trigger, waiting. Patience had always been his strength. That's what made him such an effective sniper. Now it would save their lives. "Sir," one of Mercer's men called out. "Looks like they went north, blood trails still fresh." Mercer nodded, gesturing for the team to move out. "Ghost is wounded. He won't get far. Remember, shoot to kill. No witnesses." Keegan allowed himself a small smile. The false trail he'd left was too obvious, too amateur. Any skilled tracker would be suspicious. But Mercer saw what he wanted to see. A desperate man making desperate mistakes. The team moved forward, entering the kill zone Keegan had prepared. Through his scope, he could see Mercer's satisfied expression. The captain thought he was closing in for the kill. Instead, he was walking into an execution. High in a different tree, barely visible against the foliage, Keegan caught a glimpse of Quyen. The Vietnamese sniper had stayed to watch. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, two practitioners of the same deadly art, sharing a moment of understanding. Keegan exhaled slowly, centering his crosshairs on the point man's chest. One shot. That's all it would take to start the dance. The rifle's report shattered the morning silence. The point man dropped without a sound, and for a split second the clearing was frozen in tableau. Then all hell broke loose. "Contact!" Mercer shouted, diving for cover. "Where?" The claymores detonated in sequence, their overlapping explosions turning the jungle into chaos. Shrapnel tore through the underbrush, forcing Mercer's men to scramble for what little cover they could find. But Keegan had planned for that too. Each piece of cover they might use was pre-sighted, waiting for his follow-up shots. Two more men fell before they realized the killing zone they'd entered. Mercer was shouting into his radio, calling for air support, but his words were drowned out by another explosion, this one from the buried charges Keegan had placed near the helicopters. The pilots, panicked by the sudden attack, began emergency takeoff procedures. "That's our cue," Keegan muttered, slinging his rifle. He scrambled down the tree with practiced ease, keeping to the shadows. Above them, the canopy erupted with automatic weapons fire as Mercer's remaining men shot blindly at unseen attackers. Keegan reached Rook's position, helping his friend to his feet. "Time to disappear." "Did you get him?" Rook asked as they began moving through their pre-planned escape route. "Mercer?" Keegan shook his head. "Killing him would be too easy. I want him to live with this, to spend the rest of his career looking over his shoulder, wondering when the ghost he tried to murder might come back to haunt him." Behind them, the sounds of combat were already fading. Mercer would live, but his reputation wouldn't survive this disaster. A full team wiped out, helicopters damaged, no bodies recovered, and somewhere out there, a sniper who knew too much about operations that officially didn't exist. As they moved deeper into the jungle's embrace, Keegan felt Quyen's presence fade away. The Vietnamese sniper had seen what he needed to see. Their brief alliance, formed in the crucible of betrayal, was over. They would probably never meet again, but they would remember. Some bonds, forged in blood and respect, transcended the artificial boundaries of war. "Sir," Rook whispered, his voice growing weaker. Where are we going?" Keegan adjusted, his grip on his friend, keeping them moving through the green twilight of the jungle. "There's a village 2 clicks east, Quyen's people. They'll help us if only because it spites men like Mercer. And after that?" "After that?" Keegan allowed himself a grim smile. "After that, we become what they already think we are. Ghosts, phantoms, the kind of story soldiers tell each other in the dark." Behind them, the jungle swallowed their trail, erasing any trace of their passage. Lieutenant Daniel "Ghost" Keegan, the decorated sniper, the tactical genius, ceased to exist. In his place, something else emerged. A shadow that would haunt the nightmares of men who thought they could play games with soldiers' lives. The war would go on, but they were no longer its pawns. They had become something else entirely. Something that lived in the spaces between battles, in the whispered legends of things that moved unseen through the jungle night. They had become ghosts, and ghosts, as Mercer would learn, never truly die. Dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and gold as Keegan carried Rook the final 100 meters to the village. His arms burned with exhaustion, muscles trembling from the hours of constant movement. But he couldn't stop, not when they were so close. The village appeared like a mirage through the morning mist, a collection of simple wooden structures nestled in a natural depression, hidden from aerial observation by the thick canopy above. Smoke from cooking fires rose in thin tendrils, carrying the scent of unfamiliar spices. Rook's breathing had grown more labored during their journey, his skin waxy and cold. The makeshift bandage around his midsection was soaked through, and Keegan knew his friend wouldn't last much longer without proper medical attention. "Almost there," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if Rook could hear him anymore. Just hold on. A figure materialized from the tree line ahead. Quyen, his rifle slung across his back. The Vietnamese sniper's expression was unreadable, but his stance was relaxed. Not an enemy now, not exactly a friend, something else entirely. Keegan eased Rook down at the edge of the village, his own legs nearly buckling from exhaustion. He needs help. Quyen studied them both for a long moment, then nodded once. He turned and called out in Vietnamese. Two elderly women emerged from the nearest structure, carrying medical supplies. They approached cautiously but with purpose, their eyes holding neither fear nor judgment, just the weary acceptance of those who had seen too much of war's aftermath. "They will help him," Quyen said simply. "Our village healer learned from French doctors before." Keegan watched as the women began examining Rook's wound with practiced efficiency. His friend's eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion evident in his gaze. "Sir?" Rook's voice was barely a whisper. "Where?" "You're safe," Keegan said, squeezing his shoulder. "These people will take care of you." "But you're not staying." It wasn't a question. Rook knew him too well, understood what had to happen next. Keegan managed a small smile. "Can't stay anywhere now, not after this. They'll look for you. Let them look." Keegan straightened up, feeling the weight of his rifle, the weapon that had become as much a part of him as his own limbs. They won't find what they're searching for. Quyen had been watching the exchange silently. Now he stepped forward, offering Keegan a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Medicine, food, map. His eyes met Keegan's with understanding. The jungle is vast, many places for a ghost to rest. Keegan accepted the package with a nod of gratitude. They stood there for a moment, two warriors who had been set against each other by forces beyond their control, now united in their rejection of those same forces. "Your war is not over," Quyen said quietly. "No," Keegan agreed. "But it's my war now, no one else's." The village women had finished stabilizing Rook, preparing to move him to a more sheltered location. His eyes were closed again, but his breathing seemed stronger. He would live. He would heal. And someday perhaps he would understand why Keegan had to disappear. "They will tell stories," Quyen said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "The ghost who could not be killed. The sniper who became shadow. Let them tell their stories." Keegan checked his weapon one final time, more from habit than necessity. Sometimes legends serve a purpose. They remind people that there are things in this world they can't control, things they should fear. The sun was higher now, burning away the morning mist. Soon the jungle would be alive with search parties, helicopters, men with orders to find and eliminate a threat that no longer existed. But they would be looking for Lieutenant Daniel Keegan, the decorated sniper who had gone rogue. That man was already dead. Keegan shared one final look with Quyen, no words needed between them. Then he turned and walked into the jungle's embrace, feeling its shadows wrap around him like an old friend's welcome. Behind him, the village and its inhabitants, including the closest friend he'd ever had, faded into memory. He had become what they named him, a ghost. Neither alive nor dead, neither victor nor victim, just a shadow moving through the spaces, between moments, between heartbeats, between the lies that men told themselves about war and honor and duty. The jungle accepted him, as it accepted all its children, and somewhere in its vast green depths, a legend disappeared into shadow, leaving behind only whispered stories of the sniper who chose to become a ghost. Washington Post, 1980. Retired Army captain found dead in apparent hunting accident. Captain Elias Mercer, 52, was discovered yesterday morning in the Shenandoah Valley. Initial reports suggest an accidental discharge of his own weapon, though investigation is ongoing. The newspaper clipping trembled slightly in Michael Rook Rain's weathered hands as he stood before the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The black granite reflected his aged face back at him, now lined with years he'd never thought he'd live to see. Around him, other veterans and their families moved quietly, leaving flowers, touching names, sharing memories. But Rook wasn't here for the names on the wall. He was here for a ghost. The accident had been too perfect, too clean. A single shot, they said. Long range, through dense forest. The kind of shot that only a handful of men in the world could make. The kind of shot that spoke of patience, of years of waiting for the perfect moment. Some called it revenge, others justice. But Rook knew better. It wasn't about either. It was about closing a circle, finishing a story that had begun in another jungle, half a world away. Halfway across the world, in a small village in the Mekong Delta, Keegan stood at the edge of the rainforest that had been his home and battlefield. His hair had gone gray, his face lined with age, but his eyes remained sharp as ever. He no longer carried a rifle, hadn't for years. The war was over, they said. Vietnam was healing. But sometimes on quiet mornings like this, he would hear things. A rustle in the canopy that wasn't the wind, a shadow that moved against the natural flow of the jungle. And he would smile, knowing that some warriors never truly leave the battlefield. They just choose different wars to fight. The official records listed Lieutenant Daniel "Ghost" Keegan as MIA, presumed dead. Another name lost to the jungle's embrace. But stories persisted. Whispered tales of a shadow that hunted other shadows. Of a sniper who appeared like smoke when corrupt officials or drug lords ventured too deep into territory they didn't understand. Of a ghost who protected villages that had no other guardians. Rook had received only one communication in all these years. A single bullet casing, delivered by an old Vietnamese woman who appeared at his hospital bed weeks after that last day in the jungle. The casing was carved with 2 words. Still, watching. He kept it with him always. A reminder that some bonds transcended the artificial boundaries of nations and wars. Some loyalties ran deeper than any oath to a flag or cause. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the memorial wall. Around Rook, families were departing, leaving their grief and memories behind. But he lingered, feeling the weight of the bullet casing in his pocket. In the Mekong Delta, Keegan watched the same sun rise, painting the jungle canopy in shades of gold. A single shot echoed across the distance, sharp, precise, familiar. Not a hunter's shot, not a soldier's. Something else entirely. Some said the war never really ended for men like them, that they carried it with them, unable to let go of what they'd seen, what they'd become. But Rook knew different. The war had ended. The ghost had simply chosen a different battle. Somewhere in the vastness of Southeast Asia's jungles, a shadow moved with purpose. A rifle waited, cradled in hands that had turned its use from warfare to justice. A legend breathed, watching the world spin on, choosing his own missions, fighting his own wars. And in the spaces between heartbeats, in the whisper of wind through jungle leaves, in the perfect stillness before a trigger pull, the ghost lived on, not as a soldier, not as a killer, but as something else entirely. A guardian of balance in a world that had forgotten the true meaning of justice. The war had ended, but the ghost remained. And in the deep green heart of the jungle, a shadow moved, a rifle waited, and the wind carried whispers of a legend that refused to die. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.